The same dollar can be spent multiple times throughout a day, week, and so on. Mike can use his dollar to buy a lemonade from Karen, who then uses that dollar to buy coffee from Peter, and so on. This is what the velocity of money does. It measures the rate at which a unit of currency changes hands over a certain time frame. So, why hasn't inflation become a problem after so much monetary easing or currency creation, if you will? Well, simply because, sure, central banks have been pumping a lot of money into the system, but most of that money is held by commercial banks in so-called excess reserves. For example, the US had a monetary base of about $3.7 trillion in September 2016, but $2.2 trillion were simply held as excess reserves. Therefore, with the velocity of money being so low, inflation isn't occurring. Had central banks given money directly to individuals rather than financial institutions, inflation would have most likely been considerably higher. The same way, if banks all of a sudden start lending a lot more to people, and those people use that money to buy goods or services, the velocity of money would skyrocket. Bill the banker will give Jim $1,000. Jim will use that $1,000 to buy a laptop from Joe's laptop shop. Joe will buy laptop parts from his supplier with it, and so on. As a conclusion, inflation doesn't simply appear whenever more money is pumped into the system. The velocity of money needs to also be included in the equation.
When the only constant in life is change, you need to be ready. This is the Man-Made Survival Show.
The billionaires are really warning that we're going to be finding ourselves in hyperinflation in several years, 3 to 5 years, something like that, because they're seeing the writing on the wall, and they're starting to warn people because they're going to make their move to make sure that they're not affected by this hyperinflation, because if all they're holding is dollars, the value of the dollar is going to just plummet and they're going to find themselves poor. So they're going to start making the move to go to another country that is going to support their currency. Right now they're going to move their assets, they're going to move their money, they're going to convert into the next currency that's going to be held by the entire world as the world reserve currency. That way they can continue being billionaires. So Michael Burry, he's one of the people who is warning, and he's famous because, he's the one that pretty much warned about what happened in 2008, and he became a billionaire because of it. So now he's warning that we're going to see ourselves in a hyperinflation environment. And if it is true what he's talking about, which I do believe, and not only him but others, then we have to make sure that we take the steps right now for us to be able to withstand a hyperinflation, society. So this headline comes from Zero Hedge, and it says, Michael Burry warns Weimar hyperinflation is coming. 1 week ago, Bank of America hinted at the unthinkable. The tsunami of monetary and fiscal stimulus, coupled with the upcoming surge of monetary velocity as the world's economy emerges from lockdowns, would lead to unprecedented economic overheating, or rather, precedented, as Bank of America CIO Michael Hartnett reflects back on the post-World War I Germany, which he said was the, quote, most epic extreme analog of surging velocity and inflation following the end of war psychology, pent-up savings, lost confidence in currency and authorities, end quote. And specifically the Reich Bank's monetization of debt, and extrapolated that this is similar to what is going on now. Michael Burry, who has been rather busy making waves within the financial community with his hot takes picked up on theme of Weimar Germany, and specifically its hyperinflation, as a blueprint for what comes next. The man who was made famous in The Big Short is calling for Weimar-style hyperinflation in the U.S. Below is an easily digestible report of Burry's lengthy Saturday tweet storm, which shows just how similar our world is to that prevalent in the years just before Weimar Germany saw the most explosive hyperinflation in history. Quote, the life of the inflation in its ripening stage was a paradox which had its own unmistakable characteristics. One was the great wealth, at least of those favored by the boom. Many great fortunes sprang up overnight. The cities had an aimless and wanton youth. Prices in Germany were steady, and both businesses and stock market were booming. The exchange rate of the mark against the dollar and other currencies actually rose for a time, and the mark was momentarily the strongest currency in the world on inflation's eve. Throughout these years, the structure was quietly building itself up for the blow. Germany's inflation cycle ran not for a year, but for 9 years, representing 8 years of gestation and only 1 year of collapse. We are there now. The only question is, when do we enter the exponential currency collapse phase? And the reason that is really important that he mentioned that last part is because the only reason Germany only lasted in hyperinflation from 1 year is because other countries intervene in the hyperinflation stage. Because, this was post-World War I. And, something that I forgot to mention in the first podcast is that all those countries that I gave you the hyperinflation numbers on, all that happened after a war. All the hyperinflation happened after a war, for the exception of Zimbabwe and Venezuela. Now, with that fun fact, if we go into a war with China, would that mean that we could hit hyperinflation during or after the fact? Because remember, we're really hot into going to war with China right now, and even Russia too. NATO cannot wait for them to shoot their guns. But the point is that if that happens, will that trigger the hyperinflation? We don't know. We just have to wait and see, because a war doesn't have to happen for hyperinflation to happen. But the point in all of this is that if it wasn't for other countries to intervene in Germany's hyperinflation, it would have lasted a lot longer than 1 year. So how much more would people have suffered during that hyperinflation mode? That's the part that we don't know, because there was intervention. I ask you this question. Who will bail out the United States if we go into hyperinflation? It's going to be a lot more difficult for another country to bail us out, because we're the world reserve currency. We are supposed to be the top dog. We're supposed to be the strongest currency of the world. Yes, there's the yuan, there's the euro, but who's going to bail us out? Who's going to give us over 27, or technically right now over $32 trillion of debt? Who's going to bail us out from that? Because in the previous podcast, I gave you the examples how much debt they had, and they were only in the billions. Something more easily bailed out, or something that they could bail out a lot easier than $28 trillion. And if we go with the personal debt, it's over $100 trillion, or really unfunded liabilities. The point is who is going to bail us out? In the previous podcast, I gave you the definition on not the definition, but how countries get out of hyperinflation. And one of them is that they cut spending. They have to cut it in order for them to be able to come back into surplus and bring down the inflation mode. And two is to adopt a different currency, whether they come up with a new one or they adopt another one from another country. So that is one of the two steps, or probably both, that the United States will have to take in order for us to come down for the hyperinflation mode. Very important for us to understand that part. Okay, and right now, comparison to what Germany was going through with the boom in Main Street and Wall Street, the only reason that we're seeing that today is because the Fed is pumping so much money into the markets. If it wasn't for all that pumping, the markets would have already collapsed. But the Fed came into the rescue, and it's coming to the rescue each and every day, so the markets can stay high. Because if the markets are wiped out, trillions of dollars are wiped out right with it. And that would be one of the things that would make the economic collapse even worse, and hyperinflation to be even worse. All right. The next billionaire, all right, his name is Paul Singer, and he said this: inflation is spreading in both scope and intensity. If and when it breaks out in an inescapable broad way, there will be a crowd of seriously confused policymakers making excuses and claiming that inflation does not in fact exist. It's not their fault. It was completely unpredictable, and or it will actually be good for people. Nobody in America has actually seen, or most people probably can't even contemplate, what an actual loss of confidence may look like. And the reason is because no one believes, outside of them doing their own research, that the US dollar will ever collapse. If you talk to regular people who either don't pay attention to the news or they really don't care, then then they're going to tell you that they will tell you that the dollar will never collapse. So it's going to be difficult for them to understand what is going to be happening when it happens. When they see that they can no longer pay for their rent, when they can no longer pay for food, not because of the lockdowns, but because their money purchasing power is just simply not there, That's when they're going to care. Those are the people who are going to be hit the hardest. Now, you have the foresight right now to prepare accordingly to this, because all of this is something that is happening each and every day. You know, the hyperinflation, or, you know, an economic collapse, economic disaster, whatever you want to call it, is not something that has been happening overnight. It's something that has been happening over years. And the only reason that a lot more people are paying attention to it right now is because of what's happening with COVID-19. If it wasn't for COVID-19, we would be going, or very many Americans would still be blinded to the fact of how desperate the situation is right now. Okay? That is one of the reasons why Washington is desperately trying to bail these states out, at least, you know, California and others, because they understand that if they don't do that right now, the whole system can collapse. California can collapse because they don't have any money. That's why they need this bailout. All right, so going back to what the Fed says, all right? So the only reason that the Federal Reserve can really promise the private sector and other countries and all the markets that everything is going to be okay is because they have to lie, because they know the data. I have a video from Jerome Power when he says one of the stupidest things that anybody has ever heard. All right, people who are in the financial world, they know that he's lying through his teeth. So the people who do not understand finances and, you know, monetary policy and stuff like that, they're the ones who are easily fooled because they don't know what's going on. But the people who do know, the billionaires, hedge funds, companies, you know, people who are in the financial system all the time, they understand that what Powell said is a complete lie. Although some Washington politicians pretty much ate it all. But this video is really going to show you how the hypocrisy is there. All right, and pay very close attention to his words, because those are the ones we're going to be holding on to here in just a second. All right, here it is.
I would just say that we do expect inflation to move up, both because of base effects, as I discussed yesterday, and also because we could have a surge in spending as the economy reopens. We don't expect that to be a persistent, longer-term force. So while you could see prices move up, that's a different thing from persistent high inflation, which we do not expect. And if we do get it, then we have the tools to deal with it.
What would you say constitutes sound money?
Well, the public has confidence in the currency, which they do, which the world does. That's really what it comes down to, that people believe that the United States currency is perfectly reliable and stable in value.
Okay, so as a store of value, it clearly isn't stable in value. It is not. But as a store of value, the U.S. dollar really, is it diluted as a store of value when M2 goes up by more than 25% in 1 year? Does the printing of more U.S. dollars somehow diminish the value of the dollars that others hold?
You know, there was a time when monetary aggregates were important determinants of inflation, and that has not been the case for a long time. So you'll see, if you look back, the correlation between movements in different aggregates, you mentioned M2, and inflation is just very, very low. And you see that now, where inflation is at 1.4% for this year. Inflation dynamics evolve over time, but they don't tend to change overnight. And so we've had, and I remember well, I was in college during the 1970s. I remember well high inflation and this feeling of powerlessness on the part of anyone to deal with it, until finally Paul Volcker did exactly that. And we've been in a low inflation, disinflationary mode ever since. So what I see is an economy where there's still a great deal of slack. I see the prospect of really significant progress as we put the pandemic behind us. As we see that data, we've got in place guidance that tells markets clearly when we will begin to taper asset purchases and when we will begin to raise interest rates, when the economy, in that case, when the expansion is very far advanced. So we have our tools, we have them in place, and we think that this is the appropriate policy stance.
All right, so for the people who do not know what M2 is closely watched as an indicator of money supply and future inflation. and as a target of central bank monetary policy. Okay, and all that just to say this. Sound money is, the public and the world has confidence in the US dollar. So when people see that there's a lot of money printing and all those things, that's when they become, well, they don't have confidence. But right now they do have confidence because, their life is still going on normal. They still have access to the same, goods and services that they did in the past. So right now they don't care, especially the average American or the average citizen. So really, now that we're going to be moving into this other part of the economy that we have to talk about, outside of the money printing, is how the government really does become funded. On a regular day, if the Fed was never created, which, of course, this is how the government has been financing itself for a long time now. But if the Fed was not created, the way that the government raises funds to be able to operate, to be able to pay congressmen and the police and everything else, the way that they do it is through taxes and through bonds, through treasury bonds and other bonds that they give out. That's the way that they do it. So people go buy a bond, and let's say that they give them 5% interest. The government would pay 5% interest to the person who gave them the money, and then after the 10 years or 1 to 10 years, however long the term of the bond is, the government will give that person their money back. So the way that person made money was on the interest rate. So that is the way that the U.S. government, very simply, is how they fund themselves, not only through taxes, but through everything else that they do. Right now, the U.S. government has a deficit a lot greater than what the money they bring in. And deficit simply means what it is just debt, right? They spend more money than they're bringing in. So they have a deficit of $1 trillion. That means that they're only making $2 trillion, and they have to borrow another $1 trillion in order to continue to function. And that's every year. So once you add all of that, that's how you get to the $32+ trillion that we're in right now. 28 officially, over 32 unofficially. So that's what we really have to look at. Now, I'm going to be reading the article that I read in the previous podcast, but pay close attention to what it's talking about the IOUs and everything like that, because it's going to be important for the rest of the podcast. The article comes from WLBT.com, and it says, so, just how concerned should we be about Americans' $28 trillion debt? Quote, the United States government borrows money by selling what we call treasury bonds or treasury bills to private investors or to foreign governments or to banks or to state pension plans. Whoever is willing to buy it, they sell these. Essentially, they're IOUs. These IOUs are then used to raise money to pay for things to provide to Americans, such as a COVID relief package. However, this could change if one day savers started to become less confident and more wary of loaning their money to us. This would then cause the government to have to pay more in interest to be able to borrow money, which would only increase our national debt. At this point, people start losing confidence and increasingly lose confidence. And that's what people call a debt spiral, where your debt just spirals out of control. And we don't know if and when that would happen. That's a possibility, but that's really something that's hard to predict. So now that you understand this piece of the information, right, we have the two parts of the government. One is the unlimited money printing that they do, and the second one is the money velocity. Those are the two main components that will make us go into hyperinflation. The other aspect of this would be the treasury bills, okay, because once the debt stops being funded, that's when they turn on the printing presses to increase the printing or, the money supply into the economy, because, that's how they're going to be able to pay for all these goods and services. And that's when it shoots up. So really it's two, but it has that third element to it. So once you understand that part, that's when you can start seeing in the news, right? The news headlines, in TV programs, in others, when you start seeing that they start talking about, the 10-year treasury bond or the 5-year or the 1 year, about how much the interest rate is for those bonds, and the inflation is greater than that, then that's when you understand that we're going into a very difficult time in the United States as far as the investors are concerned. Because if they get a bond, right, and it only pays back 1% and the inflation is 2%, then they're losing 1% of their money because the purchasing power is not there anymore. For you, if you don't buy any treasury bonds, the way that you care about that is because all of those, all of that gets involved in how much things cost in a supermarket, how much your power bill is going to be, how much you're paying in gas. That's how it gets translated to the other people who are not in the bond market. All right. So the next video that I have for you is really going to explain that a little bit better. All right. And this one is from the Plain Bagel, and it's going to give us the real time, or actually the modern example of a country in the EU that this happened to, and this is Greece. Pay close attention to the smaller details, because those are the details that you have to pay attention for you and your family, because that's when you see it. When you see the similarities and you can compare it from what happened then to what is happening now, you'll see where things are going to go to, right? That is the examples that you can draw the information from and the data from, and then you can apply it to what's going on in the United States, what you're seeing in the headlines, what you're reading what you're listening in the podcast and everything like that. So pay close attention to the smaller details. This video is about 3 to 4 minutes. Here it is.
It's 1999, and the Greek government is in a bit of a pickle. The European Union has just launched a fancy new currency, the euro, that will be shared by its members. But even though Greece is part of the EU, they're left off the invite. You see, despite massive tax evasion problems, the Greek government has been spending to boost social benefits and wages, which has caused their debt to GDP to rise well above the 60% required to adopt the currency. So now they must decide between cutting back spending or missing out on the Eurozone party. Unless, of course, there's a third option. You see, Goldman Sachs, an American investment bank, comes along with an idea, a way to meet the currency adoption criteria by masking the government's debt load through currency swaps. It involves a bit of lying, but this way the country can avoid radical reforms and reap the benefits of the euro. A win-win. So Greece gives it a shot, using the sleight of hand to adopt the currency in 2001. And sure enough, the stunt pays off. The currency brings with it more trade, and since the euro allows Greece to pay back off the financial strength of its fellow Eurozone members, the government gains access to better financing, enough to even bring the Olympics home for 2004. Sure, debt to GDP continues to rise above 110%, and things are a little precarious, but hey, the economy is growing, there's plenty of EU money funding the budget deficit, and so long as things keep rolling, everything will be that's not good. Looks like a real estate crisis in the US has triggered a global recession, and it's hitting Greece like a train. GDP is falling as tourism and shipping slow down, with the Athens Stock Exchange plummeting 65% in 2008. Worse yet, borrowing costs are increasing. Oh, and that shared currency we fought so hard for? Well, it's preventing Greece from stabilizing through monetary policy. And just in case things didn't look bad enough, surprise, in 2009, it's revealed that the government has been cooking the books, and its budget deficit is not 6.7%, but double that. Whoops. I mean, more than double the original estimate. Borrowing costs skyrocket as the entire country's credibility is smashed like a plate on the floor. Opa. On April 27, 2010, with a debt to GDP of 127%, the country's credit rating is dropped to junk, plummeting Greece towards default as it begins to drown in its pile of public debt. But look, on the horizon, is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's a buttload of money. The Troika, a group consisting of 2 EU entities in the International Monetary Fund, has come to bail Greece out in a bid to save the EU from the ramifications of a Greek default. Here's the plan. Lend Greece 110 billion euros to avoid default, use the bailout money to pay off expensive creditors, get the government to commit to higher taxes and lower spending to bring the country back into a surplus, and wait for this recession to blow over. So, on May 2nd, 2010, the Troika tosses Greece a lifeline, and damn. The bailout doesn't quite fix the problem. In fact, the austerity measures have put further pressure on GDP and brought debt to GDP up to 172% by 2011, with creditors quickly draining the bailout funds. This is bad, and the Troika realized that more drastic measures are required, so they devise a new plan. Give Greece another 130 billion euros, negotiate with creditors to cut the country's IOU by 53.5%, get the government to commit to further austerity measures to bring the country back into a surplus, and wait for this depression to blow over. So on February 21st, 2012, the Troika prepares the largest sovereign debt restructuring in history, tosses Greece its second lifeline, and success! The program grabs a hold, and after 2 years of further tax reforms, layoffs, and wage cuts, the government reports a structural surplus. But wait, Greece is starting to fight back.
You see, the Troika's bailout terms they're helping the government get a handle on its debt are causing unrest at home, with Greeks bearing the burden of falling wages, rising taxes, and unemployment above 25%. So when a snap election occurs in 2015, the people break over 40 years of two-party rule and elect a new anti-austerity party to office in a bid for change. The new prime minister promises to boost spending and throw down the gauntlet to the Troika to renegotiate terms, raising tensions between the government and the Troika until the country's lifeline snaps and, ladies and gentlemen, all hell breaks loose. Creditors flee Greece once again, and a liquidity crisis emerges, with fear gripping the country amid concerns of Grexit, Greece's departure from the EU. Negotiations with the Troika fall through as even its members clash, and on June 30th, 2015, with the government unable to secure any further debt relief, Greece defaults, missing a €1.6 billion debt payment to the IMF, the first developed country to ever do so. The foundation of Greece's economy begins to crack as the government shuts down its stock exchange and banking system. Greeks continue to fight against a new bailout proposed by the EU, but at this point, with the country in financial purgatory, Grexit inching closer, and no more leverage for negotiation, on July 16th, a very desperate government throws in the towel, grabbing a hold of the EU's third lifeline and accepting an €86 billion bailout in August. And so, with the fight to boost spending meeting a dramatic end, the Greek people prepare once again for a round of cuts, reforms, and hard times ahead. All in, the economy would shrink 25% as a result of the crisis. And while Greece has since finished its bailout program, the country to this day maintains a debt to GDP of 181%. And Greek people continue to suffer, with 1 in 3 Greeks at risk of living in poverty. It goes to show the terrible consequences of fiscal mismanagement. And as Greece continues down its road to recovery, let us not forget the valuable and devastating case study it provided.
All right, so very important video. So hopefully, if you did not understand anything I said about the, the treasury bonds and everything like that, this video kind of clear that up, because now you have, visualization of how the bonds can really bury a country into deep debt and then into the crisis that follows after that. So the main things that you have to get out of this video that you just watched is the following. One, that the government will lie in order for them to be able to continue the spending that they do. They're gonna have to fund the social safety nets that the citizens are really used to enjoying. And not only that, later on they're gonna have to cut all of that, making all those people who were relying on all that debt and on all those government programs, they're the ones who are going to suffer the most. So 1 in 3 people in Greece, they're in the verge of poverty. Probably millions or hundreds of thousands became homeless, lost jobs. They cannot put food on the table. They don't have power. They don't have money for electricity. So we have to ask ourselves, if that was to happen in the United States, I ask you this once again, who is going to bail out the United States? Who is going to have $32 trillion to be able to bail out the United States? Or what kind of tax reforms will we have to do in order for us to be able to cut the spending, be able to get rid of our debt, and bring down the debt to GDP ratio? If the United States has to do that in the future, millions of Americans are going to suffer. Not just the people who are in the poverty level and down. I really do believe that it's going to affect people upper middle class and down, because all the rich and all the millionaires and billionaires, they're just going to leave the country. It's going to be a lot easier for them to be able to see what's going on and just dip out. That is the reason why the 2 billionaires that I showed you earlier in the podcast, they're warning that this is going to happen. They're going to take the steps for them to get out of here to a different place where it's going to be better off, probably somewhere in Europe or China or something like that, and just continue to be billionaires somewhere else. They are not gonna have to suffer through all of this. We are. If we're not willing to move to another country for a better life, we're gonna suffer through all of this. So that is the reason why you have to make sure that you pay attention to all these terms that you've heard this entire podcast. Like bonds, treasury bills, debt to GDP ratios, stuff like that. All of that is going to be important in the future for you to understand and be able to see how close we are to an economic collapse, a real economic collapse here in the United States. The economic collapse is going to happen when the dollar no longer has any value anywhere worldwide. And I do believe, however long it takes, for China to replace the United States as the world reserve currency, that's when we are going to see our dollar collapse, and that's where we're going to see the hyperinflation. So we have to make sure that we get prepared for those days. Okay. Now, to further solidify, to further back what I've been saying, this next headline and article really shines a light on how desperate the situation is economically, because not only have people gotten used to the help from the government, they depend on it 100%. This article comes from SearHedge, and the headline says, 27% of all households' income in the U.S. now comes from the U.S. government. Following today's release of the latest personal income and spending data, Wall Street was predictably focused on the changes in these two key series, which showed a surge in personal income to be expected in the months when the $900 billion December 2020 stimulus hit, coupled with a far more modest increase in personal spending. But while the change in the headline data was notable, what was far more remarkable was the data showing just how reliant on the U.S. government the population has become. We are referring, of course, to personal current transfer payments, which are essentially government source income such as unemployment benefits, welfare checks, and so on. Stated simply, what all this means is that the government remains responsible for over a quarter of all income, or 26.9% to be precise. So for all of those who claim that the Fed is now, and has been for the past decade, subsidizing the 1%, that's true. But with every passing month, the government is also funding the daily lives of an ever greater portion of America's poorest social segments. And as we concluded last year, it has not Russia, nor China, nor any other enemy, foreign or domestic, to blame, except for one, the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States. Now think think to yourself, what would happen if people suddenly lost all social safety nets here in the United States because we have to go back on the spending? You start hearing the same terms that people in Greece heard, that we're in a sovereign debt crisis. That just means that the dollar is going to zero. That the spending, or no, that the treasury bonds, the treasury yields, or these, all of these have to increase interest rates in order for us to be able to continue to borrow money. All those little details, technically not little, but all those phrases, all those terms are the ones that you have to look out for. When you hear the Fed, when you hear the government being worried about raising interest rates and all of that, that's going to give you the clue into that we're about to go into a very difficult time here in the United States economically. And that is something tangible that we can see each and every day, because we're going to see it at the grocery store. We're going to be seeing it in the pump, how much the gas is going to be. We're going to be able to see it in the unemployment. Because once the inflation gets to a certain point, companies are going to have to cut back. Because for them to be able to produce whatever it is that they produce, they're going to have to cut back on people. They're going to have to cut back on expenses from the people. All right, that is the reason why they have been working really hard to automate everything that they can. For example, Kroger, an article came out recently saying that they have a fully automated distribution center. That means that no one is working there, only machines. So other mega companies like Walmart, Amazon, others, they're gonna increase the autonomization. I know I said that wrong, but the point is that they're going to increase the robots in their warehouses in order for them to be able to withstand this hyperinflation environment. Even though it's going to be worse for them because no one is going to have any money to be able to pay the prices that they're going to be asking for. So that is the reason why you have to make sure that you have a system in place in your home where you can resupply yourself without having to go to the grocery store. That is the reason why the 14 categories that I give you are very important for you to work on. And if you feel like there's anything missing there, feel free to let me know, or just feel free to add it to your plan. Because we're going to have to make sure that we look at all of our preps really, really hard and see where we're lacking and really plug up those holes, because otherwise, once this comes down, we're going to find ourselves in a very hard spot. Now, going back to people who are very dependent on the government, right? I have this final headline for you for tonight, and it says, "Rise up, fight back. Detroit rent protest erupts amid nationwide eviction crisis." That's also from SearHedge. At least 100 people gathered at a rent demonstration in Detroit on Saturday after following a mother who was evicted with police assistance not too long ago. People walked in the streets in the metro area shouting, "No slumlords, no cops, all evictions got to stop." This comes as millions of Americans are behind in rent and face evictions in the nationwide moratorium expires at the end of March. All right, very, very simple, easy to understand article. People are pissed that they're being evicted. How much more angry are they going to be when they can no longer afford food, even with government assistance? Because let me remind you, in Venezuela, the government gives people, food stamps pretty much, but they can they can buy hardly anything with it. In Venezuela, a carton of eggs is worth 1 month wage, a whole month. Can you imagine you yourself and your spouse working yourself an entire month just to be able to buy eggs? What about all your other bills, your mortgage? What about the power bill? What about all of this? I continue to say, and I will say until it happens, that while the United States is still a rich country, you still have your paycheck, you still have this stimulus, whatever it is, that you have to make sure that you put in place a system where you're going to be better off when something like that happens. Because even if you already have food and water and everything else, the next thing that you can stock up on is going to be gold and silver. Because gold and silver is going to be something very important that a lot of people are going to be using later on. Right now, the misconception is that people are not going to trade, gold with other people. But you don't want to trade the gold with other citizens who don't have anything. You're going to trade it with the government. The government is going to do one of two things. They're going to do what they did in the 30s, I believe it was, where they confiscated all the gold. Or they're going to beg people to give it to them so they can buy it back. So you can show up to, let's say, your local bank, and for 1 ounce of gold, you get $100 billion because, we're in hyperinflation. That hyperinflation, or actually that gold, will help you out with all the prices that are already in hyperinflation mode. Because what I told you in the previous podcast, which, let me go up, is the price of bread and everything else in the hyperinflation countries in history. I'm going to go back through it just real quick. In Germany, a price of bread was 200 billion marks, while 1 ounce of gold was 87 trillion. Just imagine how many loaves of bread you could buy with 1 ounce of gold back in 1920. In China, it doesn't say the price of the bread, but with 1 ounce of gold, you can get 500 million yuan. Zimbabwe, the price of bread is 35 million Zimbabwe dollars. The price of gold, 87 trillion. Venezuela, the price of bread is 5 million bolivares. The price of gold, over 3 billion. So that is the reason why gold is very important. If you already have food, water, the whole list. If you already have food, water, medical, tactical, communication, energy, survival training, boga bag, boga location, boga vehicle, hygiene, and clothing, then the last thing that you can do is stock up on gold and silver. It is going to be something very important and something very smart for you to do, because there are about 13, let me look at it here. There's 12. There's 12 states right now who are making gold and silver legal tender. Maybe they're seeing that in the future, the fiat currency is going to collapse. So they're going to have a system in place in order for them to collect taxes. And not only that, to let people be able to trade back and forth, with Walmart or whatever. So South Carolina, Louisiana, Tennessee, Missouri, Indiana, Texas, Kansas, Oklahoma, Utah, Arizona, Wyoming, and West Virginia right now have taken the steps to make gold and silver gold and silver legal tender. So if you had, let's say, 100 ounces of gold, because right now you're 60 or 70 and you have accumulated all that gold and silver over time, even if you don't need it because you're very old, your children, your grandchildren, your great-great-grandchildren are going to be able to use it. And everybody in your family are going to be better off than all the people around them because you prepare with gold. Now, let's say you're 20 years old. You just got out of high school or you're right now in college. You can do the same thing. All right, so what I have here with me, okay, it's gold and silver. And for these 3 pieces of silver, which are an ounce each, it's about the same price as this 1 gram of gold. Both of this was about $100 each. So if you don't have a lot of money, you can accumulate this slowly over time. Let's say you set $100 a month aside to be able to buy this, then over time you're going to accumulate a lot. But you have to do something, okay? The gold, I've always said, is the rich man's, currency metal, and silver is a poor currency metal because you can buy a lot more with less money with silver than you can with gold. But anyways, my point is that if we're seeing that we're going through an economic collapse or we're about to go into it or it's going to take another 5 years, whatever, we know we're going to get there. You want to have this in place before anything happens, because if you try to buy it at the last minute, it's going to happen like when people try to short squeeze silver. It's going to be completely gone. Nobody's going to be able to find it anywhere. And the bullion banks are going to have a difficult time, getting their hands on them. That's why you have to have it with you at all times, or at least, have it with you physically, not in a paper or in a vault anywhere, especially if you have small quantities. If you had millions of dollars worth of gold, then yeah, you want to take precautions. But if you only have, $10,000 worth of gold, then it's not going to be that big of a difference. What I'm saying is that eventually, in an economic collapse scenario, this is going to be very, very valuable once you start trading that currency with the government. Right? So what I'm about to tell you is going to be for the people who stayed all the way to the end, because I want to reward you for staying all the way to the end and listening to this podcast. Right now, I have about 13 people in a private group on Facebook. For the first 50 people that get there, I'm going to do a drawing, right? And I'm going to give you gold and silver, or gold or silver, I should say. So if you're listening to this and you stay all the way to the end, go over to facebook.com, find the page, the private group, add yourself to it. And once it gets to 50, I will do a drawing. For 5 people, they're going to receive either gold, silver, or you're going to get this custom-made knife that I really, really like. Right? I want to do this because I want to reward the people who are listening to this all the way to the end. Now, we are planning and we are thinking about doing a type of drawing once we get to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, on Facebook, and all the other social media, on Speaker. So we will do it then. By then, we're going to try to give away not only gold and silver and the knife that you just saw, but also bug out bags. We're going to be giving out the EMP kit that I have at the MidMidSurvivalStore.com. We're going to be giving away books. We're going to be giving away a bunch of stuff to people once we get to the 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. Now, I'm not saying this at the beginning of the video because this is firsthand for the people who are staying all the way to the end. Because, I do get the matrix from YouTube and other places where it tells me at what point people stop listening to the podcast. And there's a smaller number of people who listen all the way to the end, the entire hour, to people who just listen to the first 30 minutes. So I want to reward you for listening to this all the way to the end. So once the members get to 50 people, I will do the drawing, and 5 out of those will get these rewards. Once we get to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, 1,000 subscribers on Brighteon, 1,000 subscribers on speaker platform, whether it's Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio or whatever it is, 1,000 on Facebook, then we'll do the big drawing, because it's going to cost a lot of money. That's going to take a lot of my savings. So I would really appreciate it if you can go in there and start subscribing, because yes, we are trying to, encourage people to subscribe to the channel. That way we can have people sharing this stuff more, and more people can become aware of what's going on, and they can get prepared. So I would really appreciate it if you did that. So again, for the first 50 people that go into the Facebook page and they subscribe to it, to the private group, you're going to get gold, silver, or one of these knives. The price might, not the price, but the total value of it might be around $500 to $1,000, depending on how big the piece of gold and silver are. And really, this knife right here, by itself, cost made is about $150. So it's a valuable thing. This is all of these things are valuable. They're well made, and you do get what you pay for when you buy them, but you're gonna get it for free. So again, go over to the Facebook page, to the private group, sign up to it, and once we do the drawing and you win, I will send you an email and I will let you know. But here in the next few days, we're gonna make the announcement at the beginning of each podcast, so more people will know. But you get to know first before they do. That way you have the opportunity to go on there and subscribe first. That way you have better chance of winning than if we start saying this at the beginning, more people know, and they just go to subscribe just to try to win something. All right. So please get prepared. Share this information with your friends and family all throughout your social media. Please remember, we're giving a book away for free. It's Preppers Secrete Cache. You can go to the mementsofavastore.com. The link is right there in the front. You can get the book for free. All we need your help is with shipping. The book retails for $24.99 and the shipping is $9.99. So you are in fact getting it for free. So I would really appreciate it if you can go on there and check it out. Again, subscribe to the channel on YouTube, Brighteon, whatever it is you're listening this through. Go over to Facebook, sign up for the private group, and make sure you share this information with your friends and family all throughout your social media. Leave us a comment, like the videos, whatever it is. I would really appreciate it. But again, my name is Jose Prado, and remember, always ready.
U.S. commander in the Pacific warning about the threat of China, and he did it yesterday.
I think our conventional deterrent is actually eroding in the region, and it's because of the vast advances that the Chinese have undertaken in both terms of capacity over the last 20 years, and then in the next few years, the improvements they'll make in their capabilities as well.
So is a war with China on the horizon? By the way, the same country that poisoned the world last year, and we're still dealing with it now. Our next guest co-wrote a brand new book. You got to grab it. It's called 2034, a novel, and I put that in quotes, of the next world war. Because the guy that I'm about to introduce you to would know exactly how it might play out. The former Supreme Allied Commander, one of the most esteemed commanders in this country, Admiral James Stavridis. Admiral, first off, that was a statement yesterday. That's a perfect tee up for why your book matters. Was he getting us, was that a 5-alarm fire he was getting us ready for?
I'd say it's a 4.5-alarm fire anyway, Brian. Look, that's Admiral Phil Davidson, the commander of all U.S. forces, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, all across the Pacific and Indian Ocean. He is our point man on this. And when he says China's capabilities are rising and rapidly, we ought to pay attention. He also said China is threatening Taiwan very seriously in the near term. These are the kind of flashpoints that we put in the novel 2034 to try and make the point that this could happen. It's real. We have to prepare.
Admiral, how would this play out? I mean, right now, they are building up rapidly. We're trying to maintain and grow a presence in the area. When this war, if this war does take place in 2034, who wins?
You know, in the end, nobody really wins a war. But let's not give away the ending to the book. It's not the apocalypse. This is not a end of the world kind of book. But it plays out in a series of escalations, Brian. It starts in the South China Sea with U.S. destroyers sunk, fighters who are forced down over Iran. And then escalation goes up and up until some very dire things are happening toward the end of the novel. The key here, Brian, is that we have to prepare for cyber. There's a huge cyber attack in the book. and we need to be prepared in space. Creating a space force, it turns out, was a pretty good move by the Trump administration. And thirdly, we need to be prepared for a much more assertive China that can roam the oceans of the world. That's what Admiral Davidson was talking about. We got to get ready. We need a strong military deterrent if we're going to prevent this war.
You talk about the ladder of escalation. One would be Taiwan. We've been allied to them. And China's foreign minister said this: the Chinese government has no room for compromise. We urge the new U.S. administration to fully understand the high sensitivity of the Taiwan issue and completely change the previous administration's dangerous practices of crossing the line and playing with fire. That means we said we'll protect them. That would be a flashpoint. And some say within 6 years they're going to try to take Taiwan. Do you subscribe to that?
I worry about it a lot. And I believe the only thing preventing them from making a move this minute is uncertainty. They don't know what the U.S. response would be. Right. And the more we can support Taiwan with strong military capability, defensive military, the better we will be.
Admiral, thanks so much for putting this book together. It's a novel, but it's based on how it's going to play out from your almost 40 years of service. 2034 is the name of the book, a novel of a next world war. Thank you, Admiral.
The Man-Made Survival Show.